when 120, not all at once, but gradually over what seems to be like a month, began to gather together in what was called an upper room of a house. And it must have been a good-sized room, especially for back then, for 120 people to pack into this place. It started with Jesus speaking to just a handful when he said, go to Jerusalem and just wait, just tarry together, because what I've promised you is going to happen. Isn't it amazing how we read the Word of God and how so many stories find people in waiting mode, waiting on something that God has promised? Maybe it's through a prophet, and a prophet would come maybe through generations. Prophets would come and say, this is what God has said He's going to do. And they find themselves waiting and waiting. And though this would be one of the shorter waiting periods historically in the Bible, for just about 30 to 40 days, as 120 people are in a place and they're waiting. And we don't know exactly what they were doing, but we do know they were intentionally waiting on something God said was going to happen. And they knew it was going to be grand. Because it was God, they were probably seeking God. They were probably praying and they were worshiping. There was probably a lot of conversation going on. What do you think it's going to be? What's it going to be like? They waited and they waited on something that God said was going to happen. Day after day after day, nothing is happening. They're waiting, they're seeking, they're waiting, they're seeking, they're expecting, they're wanting, they're desiring, they're getting excited, they're getting anxious, and then one day, suddenly, it happens. Suddenly. 87 times in the Bible, there is a suddenly scenario of God. And some of them are just wonderful. I think about Paul when he's in prison. And what a picture that is for our lives. What an allegory. He's in prison and he has no freedom and he can't do anything. And all he can do is worship and wait. Worship and wait. Remember that song that we sang years ago here from that movie? What was the name of that movie? Was it Facing the Giants? Is that the one that says, I'm waiting on you, Lord? Oh, what a song. Worshiping while you're waiting. And then suddenly, as Paul was worshiping, a bright light showed up and the prison doors burst open. The suddenlies of God when you're waiting, you're waiting, you're waiting. And then suddenly, and that's what's going on, as these 120 are in this room and they're worshiping and they're praying and they're desiring and they're hungry and they're anxious. And then suddenly, God shows up. And what happened in that little upper room that was the birthing due to a suddenly, instantly spilled out of that room and into the city streets. And Luke, the writer of Acts, begins to document the history that within days, the whole city was filled with awe because of what happened suddenly in that little upper room. The product of that suddenly was easy to capture in two simple categories. Because of that suddenly and what spilled out of that suddenly, sinners were saved and saints were sent. It was an incredible thing because what always follows the suddenlies of God is a supernatural outbreak. We think about pandemics and how suddenly something comes out of nowhere, and that's what we've experienced in the last year and a half, that suddenly something began to break out and it spread. It was infectious all over the world. And I wonder if there's any chance that God would want us to see the prophetic value of that when suddenly out of nowhere something breaks out, but it spills into the bigger picture quickly. The suddenlies of God is always the opening door for the supernatural into the earth.
watching Sermon Shorts with Pastor Scott Catton.